of things, I think like a lot of things in education, but maybe especially in entrepreneurship and enterprise education, when it comes to incorporating kind of real ventures into a course, it's something that I've either inherited through courses or something I've been asked to design. There's not really been a huge amount of kind of guidance or support in terms of how to do that. So Ranjit, Julie, and Mark are all people I've either worked with or met through various events, and they all teach or run courses that incorporate new and small ventures in there, and I think in very different and interesting ways. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Ranjit, as the first speaker from University of Strathclyde.
Ranjit, you're on mute.
Apologies for that. That was a rookie mistake. There you go. Welcome to the session. Alan and I met on a different course, and we both kind of teach a module which looks at helping undergraduate students develop their entrepreneurial skills. So I'm going to be looking at the topic of how we engage with new and small ventures in entrepreneurial education, specifically looking at the undergraduate population. So I'm from the University of Strathclyde, as Adam said, so quick for the University of Strathclyde. You can see we are fairly strong on entrepreneurship. We have the Hunter Centre for Entrepreneurship, which was set up by Sir Tom Hunter with a £7 million award for us back in 20 years ago. And Sir Tom was really frustrated, saying, look, there's a marketing department, an economics department, a finance and accounting, but why isn't there a department for entrepreneurship? And so he set that up. So we've been running strong for 20 odd years. We've got about 35 academics working in the area of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education. So I'm going to share with you a module that I teach, which is entrepreneurial capital. It's a third-year undergraduate module. We have around 100 students, around 20 international students, 80 Scottish students. In Scotland, the degrees are 4 years long, and so third year is the entry year to get into the honours year. And so this is quite a heavy 20 credit module, quite intense. Students don't like numbers in general. And so I've had to really think about how can we make this interesting and not death by spreadsheets and number crunching. So what we've done is to say, well, look, we're going to look at topics like how do startups fund their ventures. You know, obviously bootstrapping, they go to friends and family and ask for money, they sell their car, sell their house, etc. They may then go into bank loans, look to government grants, maybe then move on to angel investors. If it then develops, they would look at venture capitalists as a form of funding. And there are alternative funding sources like leasing instead of buying, etc., etc. So the assignment I devised or was designed is really kind of trying to make it interactive. So what we've said is it's an individual assignment. You have to go out and identify a startup and then interview the entrepreneur to find out, well, where did you go? Did you go to friends and family? Did you get a bank loan? Did you get a government grant? How did you start your business? And so the theoretical information that I'm giving in class is brought to life by the individual students going and talking to an entrepreneur. And so the other twist we add is to say, look, you can't just go along, interview the entrepreneur, walk away, and be critical of what the entrepreneur has done. You have to go back and give something back to the entrepreneur. You have to say, thanks very much. I've heard about your florist business and what you had to do to start the business. Have you considered government grants? Have you looked at maybe factoring for your business or leasing for your business? You have a florist's van that delivers flowers. Why have you purchased the van? You could look at leasing the van. So the student has to give something back to the entrepreneur that the entrepreneur might not have thought of. They may well say, yeah, we've looked at grants, it's not available for us, or whatever it might be, but it should be an interactive process. The students should consult and then hopefully give something back. So that's the concept, and it's worked very well. As I say, 100 students a year go through it. Adam and I were just talking before this session, and it is quite relaxed. I say, look, it's up to you to identify the startup. Go to maybe your hairdresser. You go for a haircut. Ask if you can interview them. Maybe you go somewhere for a local cafe for coffee in the morning. Ask if you can interview them, or a restaurant. But there's very little support from my side in finding that entrepreneur. And obviously, with 100 students, it becomes very difficult for a department to actually source and find clients for the students to interview. So that, again, is something we can maybe open up and discuss in the Q&A session afterwards. Is that right? Isn't it right? The key learnings from the student's point of view, something I haven't written down on the slides, is this kind of circumvents the ChatGPT issue in the fact that students can't just put it through ChatGPT. They have to go out and interview an entrepreneur and glean primary data and come back and write up their findings. That's a concern certainly in my department, because we have a lot of coursework rather than exams on the entrepreneurship modules. And obviously, we were finding cases of students having potentially put stuff through ChatGPT. So this, being a very hands-on, practical assignment, circumvents that, overcomes that. But looking at the key learnings for the students, it's the linking the theoretical concepts to real-world entrepreneurship practices. It's something that was written about authentic alignment, which is all about, look, I've understood the theory, let me now see what happens in real life. And I've seen this firsthand, where I talk to students about how banks are reluctant to give small, medium enterprises, especially startups, any form of funding, because they don't have a track record. So banks are very reluctant to give funding. Entrepreneurs, when they start, don't have an asset against which the bank can take some kind of security. And that's all gobbledygook for the students. But when they go in and start speaking to the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur says exactly the same point, that's when I see lights turning on and the students suddenly saying, now I get it. Now I understand about what the lecturer was talking about how difficult it is to get funding from banks. And I see that coming, and the students suddenly coming back and being more engaged with the lectures, because they're seeing this is actually happening in real life. So the actual act of going out, conducting field research and data collection is great. These are third-year students who will be going into the fourth year. They'll be doing a 40 credit dissertation as part of their degree. So this is almost like a baby step towards that. So, how do they conduct interviews? They have to go and find the research participant, the entrepreneur in this case. They have to prepare the interview questions. Yes, I give them some guidance and some help, but ultimately they have to come up with the right set of questions that they have to put together. They have to go out into the field and spend time with the entrepreneur, interview the entrepreneur. Then again, data analysis, they have to come back. They have to look at what the interviewer said. They have to then link the interview to the lectures I've given, have they used factoring, have they used government grants? So they're trying to make those links, and they need to give something back. So they have to identify potential funding sources for the entrepreneur. Now, obviously, what I'm not saying to students is that you have to go and find XYZ government grant or ABC government grant. As I said, a lot of our students are international, so they wouldn't necessarily know about government funding in Canada or government funding in New Zealand. But what I'm saying is, you can suggest to the entrepreneur that they look at that country's government grants and see what's available. You as a student, you don't need to go and find the grant for the entrepreneur, but you can point them towards that direction. So the student's very engaged and involved with that. One of the things is the student needs to come up with recommendations to the entrepreneur. So that could sometimes be a difficult conversation, saying, look, have you considered, or I don't think you're doing that correctly, maybe you want to do this. And that puts them in that grown-up situation of being a consultant and having to go back and give recommendations to the entrepreneur. And whole assignment will obviously develop their report writing and presentation skills. They have to, by third year, they should be pretty adept at it, but, sticking to the word count, referencing, using Harvard referencing, etc., and producing a robust report. There is also the final point, which is about the ethical considerations. So third year students are now thinking about, well, participant information sheet, how do I put that together? Do I get them to sign off on it and keep it on record? What about the ethical considerations about how my data will be stored and recorded and how it'll be then disposed of? These are all things that are almost taking the students through the baby steps of getting them ready to do their final year dissertation, when all of these things will be very pertinent. That, sorry, Adam, it's a little bit short, I apologize, but that is a quick summary of my experiences of of um, of carrying this out. I'm going to
I meant
stop
to say
sharing
that.
this.
Okay, I should have said at the start, actually, we've got an opportunity at the end where we'll be discussing the outcomes of your discussions in breakout rooms and also questions for any of the speakers. But also, if we do have time within the individual sections, if anyone has any questions, then please do ask. If you've got questions for Ranjit on terms of his unit, in terms of any kind of things he's doing, please do ask either in the chat or just raise your hand to kind of ask it.
And I will stop sharing as soon as I find out how to stop sharing. Not the button for stop sharing is gone. Rob, is this something you can take over and just stop sharing? Jody, you've got a question whilst I figure out the technology?
Sure. Thanks for that, Ranjit. How do you manage the risk of students giving that kind of advice to entrepreneurs in terms of like factoring debt and that kind of thing? Because if I was an entrepreneur, or have been an entrepreneur myself, and then a student's telling me, oh, maybe you should consider this or that, like, is there a way you're managing that, or do you need to manage it? I guess the question is.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I do give them strong advice. So in week 1, lecture 1, we talk about, look, you do not ask for their personal P&L accounts. I mean, if it's not a limited company, you don't have access to it. You don't cross that line to suddenly say, can I have a look at your books, please? If it's a limited company, if it's a restaurant that's limited, then obviously you have access to it. You can go to the government website and have a look. But it shouldn't be a critique of how they're running the business to the point of saying, oh, your cash flow sucks, doesn't it? It should be about, look, have you considered, government grants? And that often is something that entrepreneurs aren't even aware of. They just rushed into setting up their hairdressing salon on. They didn't realize there's a government grant available. Now, a lot of the government grants, if you look at them, are linked to environmental factors, sustainability factors. So a hairdressing salon may not get a grant for that. But if the entrepreneur is working in that area, there are grants available. So oftentimes we find that entrepreneurs aren't even aware of the grants and are very grateful. Sometimes they are aware, they've looked at it and they say very politely, yeah, we've looked at it, there's nothing we can apply for. But it's nothing beyond a suggestion. So, one of the students was from Canada and he was getting all wound up saying, well, look, I don't know the Canadian ecosystem well enough. I don't know about which grants to suggest. And I'm saying, look, you don't have to be specific. You just have to make a suggestion to the Canadian entrepreneur that you're Zooming. Have they considered government grants? And we leave it as bland as that. So we don't want to be drawn into giving specific recommendations, because you're then putting the student in the line of fire to say, well, you told me to go and apply for this grant and I've wasted 3 hours applying and I didn't get it. So we don't want them to go there. Is that okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah, hiya. Yeah, great suggestion. It was. I just want to inquire, how much time do you usually expect the entrepreneurs to commit to each student? Is it because I think you mentioned about sort of going in there and spending a day with them, just thinking about how practical that is,
Right.
or is it just like a 5-minute conversation that they have over Zoom?
No, it's a minimum 45-minute interview. That's what I say. But if you have to do it at the entrepreneur's behest when it's free for them. So I'd say, look, you have to have a set of questions which will go through. Tell me a little bit about how you started. Did you get funding from friends and family? Did you apply for a government for a loan? How difficult was it? Wasn't it? So all the topics that I'm covering in class junior, I would then expect the students to then go through. On a rare occasion, we get to a few entrepreneurs that have gotten angel financing, right? And that's fine, but 90% of the entrepreneurs that are being interviewed are very small businesses at startup phase. So they're not at the stage where they're going to go talk to an angel investor if we're looking for a £200,000 investment or £100,000 investment. So, but we keep it down to about 45-minute interview, which is what's written in the participant information sheet. So there's a standard template that the students have to use, which talks about, what is this interview for? How will this data be used? How will it be stored? How will it be disposed of? And we talk about it being 45 minutes to 1 hour.
Okay. And just a quick follow-up on that is, do you encourage or allow the students, multiple students, to work with one entrepreneur? So it might be a group of them, for example, talking
right.
to them.
Now, herein lies the issue. We are quite specific to say you cannot use friends and family and you cannot buddy up, right? It has to be your own work. You have to find a different entrepreneur, because it's too easy for individuals to say, okay, my dad runs his own plumbing business. I'll just interview my dad. We also came unstuck with one student that then declared that they'd interviewed their stepdad, and their stepdad had used funds in a very inappropriate way. And I'm saying, look, you shouldn't have interviewed your stepdad because the dad took the money, a bank loan, for saying it was a house extension, and then had used the money on the business. And I'm sure hundreds of companies go to banks and say, I need the money for a bank and a home extension, and use it for the money. But to have it written down in black and white, it's well, it's not right. And then obviously, as an academic, I'm then saying, look, this is something that's quite illegal, and it's now written down in black and white, right? Or I can't go back to my stepdad and tell him that. And so it was a very awkward conversation, saying, well, why did you use your stepdad? Right? If you'd used a neutral third party, then it would have been easier to go to the restaurateur and say, well, do you know that you're defrauding the bank in essence, right? So we are quite specific. It has to be solo effort. It has to be not your friends and family.
Thank you.
Okay. Amberin? I think you're on mute, Amberin.
Sorry. Thanks for the interesting presentation. My question is, you mentioned earlier, based on what Judy was asking about, how much they interact with the an entrepreneur, and you said that they don't need to know a great deal of knowledge about it. So I was just wondering, is the research part of it? So how much value their recommendations would be to an entrepreneur if they are just giving a very broad sort of an indication of go in this direction or not. So I'm just coming from another perspective, of an entrepreneur perspective. And also, I understand we can't put a lot of onus onto the students, but then also there should be some recommendations should be in some way informed as well. So this is where I'm coming from.
And you make a very good point, and that's a follow-up for me in the fact that there's a whole KE exercise here, which is I could go back and interview the entrepreneurs, because I have details of all the entrepreneurs, to say, well, did that recommendation change your direction? If they'd recommended factoring, for example, where a third party buys the debt from the entrepreneur and says, I'll give you 90 pence to the pound, this customer owes you £10,000 or £1,000, I'll give you £900 and I'll collect the £1,000 that's owed to you. And factoring is very popular in Europe and UK. Did the entrepreneur then, who'd never considered factoring, start to use factoring as an option? Did the entrepreneur consider leasing their vehicles instead of procuring the vehicles? So that's a whole research topic there for me to go back to as a KE exercise, to say, how much positive impact did these students' recommendations have on the entrepreneurs? If the entrepreneurs come back to me and say, you know what, it was nice, but I just ignored what they said, or yes, they gave me an insight that really helped me think about this. Certainly, anecdotally, entrepreneurs are coming and saying, I didn't know about these government grants, that's really good, right? But I haven't systematically gone and done some research to say, hey, our student interviewed you 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago. Did you take their recommendations? Did it help you? So there's a whole body of work that needs to be done around that. Absolutely. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question, but I was also following up from, you mentioned about that they may not be knowing everything about government grants or into too much depth. So how that balance is created, to what extent you will do the research, or to what extent your recommendations as a student should be valuable, or should be well informed. This is what I was trying. How do you draw those lines and parameters for the students?
Well, for example, with factoring and leasing, which are two of the options that students often put forward, I wouldn't expect my students to go along and say, here is a factoring company that could buy your debt, or here is a leasing company from which you can lease your Ford van from. What I'd be saying is share that concept with the entrepreneur, because they may not even be aware of the option to factor. Right. Factoring isn't, I mean, it's widely used in Europe, but it's not something that a hairdresser might even be aware of, or a hairdresser is not a great example, but, an entrepreneur may not be aware of. So even just raising awareness of, hey, you have this option, have you considered it, is enough. But it's not behoving on my students to then go and find a factoring company for that entrepreneur, or go and find a leasing company, Lex Leasing, for this entrepreneur with their vans. We're just raising awareness.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ranjit, there's a question in the chat around how you assess their assignments and the marking rubric, especially when they're very different types of businesses.
Right. Again, Adam, I can share the assignment outline and the marking rubric together with the PowerPoint slides if people want it, which then explains what's happened and how to do it. But the marking rubric talks about, what have you learned? How have you applied your knowledge from the lecture to assess the entrepreneur? It's obvious. Most entrepreneurs haven't gone down the route of a VC, a venture capitalist, or a angel investor route. So I'm not expecting you to write about something that the entrepreneur hasn't done. And you'd be silly to recommend an angel investor route for a florist, right? So you have to be realistic about what you can recommend. But I'm happy to share the marking rubric with the audience, together with the assignment brief as well, so it's clear how it's set out. Because it's over 10 weeks, students have enough time. I say to them in the first 5-6 weeks, identify an entrepreneur, but you don't have enough knowledge to even do the interviews. Then around week 6, week 7, you know enough about loans and angel investors and etc., that you can start having a meaningful conversation.
And just to say, it's something I'll be picking up on in my talk as well, the kind of challenges of assessing assignments based on very different ventures. So I don't necessarily have an answer to it, but I'll be touching on it as well.
Sure.
Any other questions for Ranjit, either in the chat or people online? No, if not, I'll happily take 5 more minutes, because I'm terrible at keeping to time. So I'm sure I'll be able to use those.
There was just a question from Sam, sorry, about is it 100% report? It is 100% report. The university regs are that 70% of assessment must be individual. So this module is actually a class test, which is a 2-hour online test about liquidity ratios and gearings, etc., which is testing their knowledge of basic accounting and finance. And the other one was an individual assignment about interviewing this entrepreneur. I think that the split is something like 30-70, so 30% in the class test, because students get very nervous about numbers, so I didn't want to weight the class test too heavily, and 70% is on the individual report. So it is I think a 2,000-word individual report. I've got 2 PhD students supporting me, so between us we mark 30 assignments each and cross-moderate. So I think once, Adam's going to touch on this, once we start getting to 200 students, then logistically it might be difficult. And we've got hundreds more students coming every year. So this is just, it's going to build up and up as we take on more and more undergraduate students. So yeah, but it's at the moment it is an individual essay. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Manjit. That was a great overview of your unit. I'll just share the slides for my presentation. Can you see those okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Yep. So I'll be following on from Ranjit, and in some ways there's a lot of similarities with my course, but there are some slight differences in terms of recruiting the ventures and the work they do. And mine's also a master's course, so postgraduate taught unit. So just to give a little bit about myself, I'm, as I said at the start, Adam Frost. I'm a senior lecturer in enterprise and entrepreneurship. I've been a lecturer for, I think it's about 13 years now. So I started off at Liverpool John Moores, 5 years, I think just over 4 at Queen's. So I worked with Mark and Julie, who will be talking after the break. And I've been at the Masood Entrepreneurship Centre in Manchester. It'll be 3 years this October. In terms of kind of my experience of teaching entrepreneurship education, it has changed quite a bit over that time. When I first started at John Moores, I taught units on small business management, and we did business planning units. It was mainly kind of focused on teaching about small business and about entrepreneurship, and fairly standard business plans were produced by final year students. At Queen's, when I joined, I also taught about entrepreneurship and business planning, but I did have the opportunity to develop some more experiential kind of units. So we had a year-long startup unit for final year students that I designed. And in that, students created value proposition canvases, business model canvas, tested key assumptions through different market exploration experiments. And then we also used a startup simulation. I also taught a course for commercialization for cancer medicine while I was there. So that was for another school. So quite a wide range of kind of teaching there. Since I've been at Manchester, I've been responsible for 2 modules in entrepreneurship. Both of these are ones that I've inherited. So entrepreneurial skills is a first-year unit that's taught to currently 290 students from across the whole university. So the Masood Entrepreneurship Centre, although we're based in the business school, we offer courses to students from every single school. But the other unit that I'm going to mainly focus on today is business creation and development. And that's a master's postgraduate course that's been running for a number of years, and I inherited it 3 years ago. So just to give an overview of this unit, business creation and development, it's worth 15 credits. It's a module that is part of the MSc in Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship that we have here. It is also offered to other students in the business school. They can apply to do this if they have an elective course, if they get their program director's permission, and myself. So I do currently have some arts management students, marketing students, digital marketing, creative industry students. From next year, it's also going to be offered to the MSc in Management, which I'm becoming the program director for. I'll talk about one of the challenges of that because it does mean it's going to grow in significant size. The unit is focused on launching, managing, and growing a new venture. So in the first half of the Masters for IME, Innovation Management Entrepreneurship, the students learn about how to kind of launch a business in terms of going from idea through to developing a kind of value proposition, business model, aspects of business planning. This unit says, well, what actually happens once you do launch that business? And it mainly focuses on kind of the first few years of a venture. So a lot of the focus is on how do you ensure a business is surviving, and then hopefully how does it grow? In terms of kind of the topics covered, we look at diagnosing new business performance, broader strategic analysis of new ventures, how to evaluate value propositions and business models. We look at the concept of dynamic capabilities and try and understand the extent to which new ventures do have dynamic capabilities. So the extent to which they're able to scan their external environment and then adapt what they're offering or how they're doing things in line with potential opportunities or threats that might be posed there. And the ultimate aim is for students to be able to develop strategies for survival or growth for new ventures. Currently, we have 76 students on the course, but as I said, this will be increasing next year. So in terms of engagement with new ventures, the students work in groups throughout the module, and they work with a founder or founders of a relatively new venture. And the aim of this really is for them to analyze how the business is doing, so the internal operations, to assess its external environment, so looking at opportunity threats, looking at what might impact the business now and potentially in the next couple of years, and also evaluating the founder or founders and any key management within the business. Unlike Ranjit's unit, ventures are sourced either by myself or by the Masood Entrepreneurship Centre where I work. The reason for that mainly is that there's quite a lot of engagement from the ventures. There's also I kind of need to check that the venture will meet the requirements, that it is going to work out with them. And I think from an academic point of view, with this course, it would be a struggle if I didn't know who the ventures were and I didn't have a certain amount of information on them when it comes to marking their reports. Ideally, the founders will have launched their venture within the last few years and ideally be generating sales. There are a few exceptions to that. So some of the ventures have been going for a little bit more than 3 years, but they can be at the very early stages, or it might be that the business has had to significantly pivot and in effect restart. There have been 1 or 2 ventures we've used that haven't been generating sales yet, but in those examples, they tend to be startups that have come through long periods of research and development, maybe gained significant funding, and are literally on the cusp of going from having this idea, having the funding, to sales. So one of this year's ventures who takes part, they've had around 3.5 million of funding, and they have they've got commitments from customers to buy it, and they've launched the business actually this week. So there's a big challenge for them going from the stage they're at to the next one. We've had quite a wide range of ventures take part in the course since I've been doing this, so that's 3 years. Currently, there are 6 ventures taking part, and there are 13 groups. So on the whole, each venture works with 2 groups of students, and we have 1 venture who works with 3 groups. The reason for that, there's kind of 2 reasons, I guess, why I have more than 1 group per client. One is just from a logistics point of view, trying to get 12 or 13 different ventures and managing that process within the course will be quite a challenge. I also think from the ventures point of view, they're committing a lot of time to this. Getting 2 reports, it reduces the risk that they get a report that's not particularly good. I've been very impressed by the quality of the reports that I've seen from students, but I think by getting 2 reports, it means they're more likely to get value from that. At least one of the reports hopefully will be very useful for them, if not both. And you can see here we've had a wide range of ventures. So we've had some fairly standard businesses in terms of fairly standard and recognizable business model, like a marketing agency. We've had online retail or sustainable products. We've also had more service-based businesses like an education and training company. We've also had some technology ones like blockchain and customer loyalty business is a current one. We've had a few from the biomed agriculture businesses, and they've come about through the Graphene Centre here at the University of Manchester, health and beauty, ceramic tiles, sustainable. And one of my previous students from John Moores University launched his own beer brand and was based in Liverpool. So he's been one of the kind of people taking part as well in this. In terms of what the course looks like, it's taught over 11 weeks. Each week there's 1 hour lecture. In the lecture, I give a very standard lecture to all the students where we go over different topics. And there's a 2-hour workshop each week as well. The workshops are a combination of different things. So sometimes we do look at written case studies on new ventures and applying some of the things we're learning in the lecture there. Quite often, I'll be getting the students to reflect on where they're up to in the assignment with their analysis of the venture, getting them comparing and talking to other groups who've got different ventures about some of the challenges they've faced. And within 2 of the workshops, they also meet the founder of the business. In terms of engagement with the ventures, students are given a briefing document on their venture at the start of the module. This is a 2-3 side survey that I send out to the founders of each venture, and they complete this, providing information about themselves, the business, links to any websites, social media accounts, an overview of any kind of financial indicators that they're happy to share. The students then also meet their founder or founders in 2 Q&A sessions during the course. So these take place in the workshops in weeks 3 and 6. That's the group on their own with the venture. So for those businesses with 2 groups, they would have a 50-minute Q&A with group 1. And then after that, they'd have a Q&A session with group 2. And really, the point of those Q&A sessions are to get that more information in the first one on the client. It might be to try and understand the business, because some of the businesses can be quite technical. Some are coming up with very new and innovative types of products. And then the second Q&A session should ideally take place after they've undertaken a lot of research on the business, but especially on the external environment. So that's where they're getting their follow-up questions to try and understand the business and also start to share some of their thoughts and ideas. I control access to the ventures. I'm very aware that, you know, for some of these businesses, the founder might be the only full-time employee, or even if there are other staff, you know, it's a very small team. So all the founders are extremely busy. So what I don't want is students emailing them daily or weekly with very specific questions. So I do make sure the students are aware that they need to use the 2 Q&A sessions effectively. If they do have any burning questions for the client organization, then they can email that to me and I'll kind of collate and send them over as one document to the client organization. But I also think it's important for the students to understand that from a kind of consultancy type relationship, which this is, they do need to use the time effectively for that. In terms of assessments, there is a group formative assessment. So this is a poster outlining their main findings from the analysis of the venture. So they don't get a mark for that, but that comes at the end of about a week after the second Q&A. And that's an opportunity for the students to say, this is what we think the current situation is of the business. This is what we think is the kind of strengths and weaknesses of the organization, of the founders, and potential opportunity threats within the external environment. And overall, this is our assessment of them. They get feedback on that from me in terms of the analysis undertaken, but they also then get feedback from the client. And that often might be that there's a misunderstanding about the business or business model, or a misunderstanding about the external environment, and it's also feedback in terms of what they think about their initial analysis. In terms of the marked work, they do a group summative report. The report comes in 2 sections. Section 1 evaluates the venture's current situation performance. So they should be assessing the venture internally, the founder, and the external environment. And then they create a set of recommendations and action plans for the venture's survival and/or growth. At the moment, it's a 30-page group report, which is what I inherited. It will be reduced down next year, partly because the Manchester Business School has kind of set a number of guidelines on what their market expectations should be and the assessment criteria, and that's deemed too long. I do make it low that the first section is all about the analysis. The second section is very much a separate 10-page outline of recommendation and action plans, and that's very much geared towards the ventures. So when I give these to the founders, I do say, you know, there's 20 pages of analysis there, be really useful, but the second part is the bit that, you know, I really want you to focus on. This is what they say you should be doing. As well as that, the students do an individual summative assessment. So the summative individual is worth 60%, the group is 40%. The individual piece is a critical reflection of the process and experience of analysing a new venture's current situation and performance. So they need to think about the strategic analysis tools and frameworks we've been using and compare that and the academic literature on that with their own experiences, the benefits and challenges of using these type of tools to assess their specific new venture. And it's a good balance between them critically analysing academic content, but then drawing on their own experiences of this as well, and trying to understand what's specific to their venture, what might be more common benefits and limitations of these approaches with other ventures as well. In terms of student feedback on this is surveys from the last 2 years. We've just finished teaching this course this year, so I haven't got data from this year yet because they're just about to submit their group reports. But generally, over the last couple of years, students have been very positive about this. So you can see there the experience of working with the client has been very positive. And in terms of whether they think it's a kind of negative or positive impact on their learning, they are fairly positive on this. In terms of the small number who are less positive, I'll kind of come back to why that is in terms of some of the feedback and challenges of this unit. In terms of level of understanding of what is involved in creating and growing a successful new venture, so I took some different measures of this at the start and end of the course over the last 2 years, and you can see at the start of the course, quite a mix. the majority of students were fairly neutral on this in terms of no understanding extensive. Some had some understanding, some not much. By the end, there was obviously a much higher level of understanding on this. And they did feel that increased their ability to launch and grow a new venture. And a lot of the qualitative feedback I got on this, and especially in the student evaluation surveys, was that it was something they hadn't really studied before. They'd studied both in this master's in the first semester and also in some of their previous degrees about entrepreneurship, but it often either focused on the kind of creating a business, that early stage, you know, from idea to maybe getting funding to doing a business plan, or they'd looked at more high growth firms or medium-sized businesses. They hadn't really looked at businesses who are at this very early stage, maybe 6 months in, maybe a year in, and the challenges that they're likely to face with that. Finally, in terms of the experience of working with a live client organization, I asked that compared to doing a written case study, which is what they've done in a lot of their other courses. And the vast majority of students preferred the experience of working with a live client organization rather than a written case study. And once again, the small number of students who were preferring a written case study, I think from their feedback, there were key reasons for that, and I will kind of come back to that. In terms of an interesting one, though, the majority of students felt that clients would adopt their recommendations, but there was still quite a sizable chunk of students, so over a third, who felt that they probably wouldn't do that. And that's a challenge, I think, for me, that I'm going to talk about at the end, around trying to get perhaps better data on this to show them examples of maybe where they have used these recommendations in past years to kind of hopefully show there is value in this, and also to kind of make the students think what they're doing is worthwhile. Some other feedback then just from here, and this is from some of the student evaluation surveys that are done by the school at the end of the year. So, you know, it gave an opportunity to learn about real life world problems, not just theoretical ones, and helped relate the teachers to real life. A very common piece of feedback that it made it more engaging. And I have to say, I found that in the class as well. It was a very positive class. The last 3 years I've been teaching it. It's a challenging unit to teach, but I found it very positive. The students are very engaged and motivated. It feels like they're applying theory into practice. A common issue for students, and I'm going to come and talk about this when I talk about the challenges, is that they felt they quite often couldn't really get the information they wanted or needed. So companies weren't able to discuss costs, data and profits was sometimes not given or was confusing. And I'll kind of come back to this in a second. I think this is a benefit, that this is a real life example. Lots of the entrepreneurs are at early stages and don't have particularly good data on their businesses, but some of the students found this very frustrating. In terms then of any other benefits, I have had positive scores and comments in the module evaluations. And students have given a lot of feedback actually in the qualitative comments on this, both in terms of what they've liked, but also ways they think it could be improved. There generally has been very good attendance and engagement in lectures and workshops throughout the unit. I've not really had any issues with this, which some other courses have had. I think the fact that in the workshops, they're often reflecting on what we're teaching in terms of their client, they're able to talk about their client, and they have to be prepared for the 2 Q&A sessions, has really made them very engaged in this subject. I've also had very positive feedback from the ventures. So I get positive feedback even just after the first Q&A. Some of the ventures say it's almost like a therapy session. Some say it's almost, you know, quite often they say they come out of it and it's quite an intense 2 hours of their time. But they often come out and say, you know, I've just been asked questions that I should have been asking myself 6 months, a year ago, but I've never thought about that. I probably, and this is one of the challenges I'm going to talk about, probably need to do a little bit more work on measuring the impact this has on the ventures, because I do think that's kind of a key part. And, you know, what Ranjit was saying before, I think it's something that I need to be a bit more proactive on as well. Having said that, there are some challenges. One of the challenges is finding suitable and increasing number of new ventures every year. So at the moment, I have just under 80 students on this course. When it's offered as an elective to the management masters, there's a potential for it to increase to 150. That means I either need to increase the number of clients. I either have to also probably increase the number of groups working with each client or change how the kind of Q&A sessions work. But the Masood Entrepreneurship Centre, where we're based, one of the good things I think about Manchester's approach is that there's a team of academics teaching these courses, and we're supported by the business and student support staff. We have people in the team who work with our alumni, who work with the ventures that we've created, and are very helpful engaging them. But this is quite a specific group of ventures, and it is quite a big ask of them. So the fact that we get the client organizations, the ventures, has positive aspects. It means I have more control of it. It means I'm more confident that I'm going to be able to compare the academic outputs, which is quite a challenge, but it is obviously a challenge there. One of the advantages of COVID is that we're much more confident doing things online. So some of the clients have been online, and that's worked really well. I've made sure we use good rooms for the Q&A sessions where they can kind of have really good video meetings. The students also like these because they can record the team meetings and get a transcript. So it kind of helps in terms of the notes of that as well. But I am looking for new ventures, and I'm also hoping next year to have some international ones as well. I think one of the biggest challenges I've found with this, and this is something that I hadn't expected early on, and it's something I've really had to work on and especially incorporate more into the workshops, is coaching the students through the whole process. So doing the Q&As, students, when I first did this unit, I didn't give them a huge amount of support with that. If I'm honest, I kind of thought they're master students, they're very capable students. I had done a few weeks content on some of the issues. I put some general suggested questions, but actually the students found it very difficult to think about what to ask them. Also, from the feedback from some of the clients, they were asking things which were very specific based on theory that the ventures had no idea of. So they would go in and say, you know, what's your value proposition statement? And many of the ventures, you know, had one, but didn't call it that. So I realized I had to coach them in terms of preparing for the Q&A. I've also had to coach the students in terms of trying to understand the venture, understand the external environment, understanding the internal aspects of the organization. The students are always quite surprised how informal most of the businesses are. They're at the stage where they've not yet developed formal control systems for things like finance, for customer engagement, retainment. A lot of them don't really have formal policies or procedures around HR, even if they've got 1 or 2 employees. So a lot of students are very frustrated by this, but I'm trying to show them actually this is the point of this course, that this is the reality. And the challenge is, if the business is going to grow, how do they implement these systems, structures, if they're going to go from being just them or a few people up to 5, 10, maybe 20 people. And that coaching has had to happen throughout the whole course. I also sometimes have to encourage the students to think a bit more critically, to maybe challenge the founder a little bit more. Some students will come out of the meetings and say, well, the founder wants to do this, so we're going to, you know, tell them how to do that. And, you know, I have to kind of tell them, actually, the founder isn't necessarily the most objective or good person to kind of view their business. You're looking at it from an outside, challenge them on what they're doing, on the way they're doing things. Many of the founders are from very specific scientific or technical backgrounds, and yet the business is very now at a management stage where they're employing people and they don't necessarily have the skill set to do that. So getting the students to really challenge and think, well, what changes might be needed even in the leadership of the organization can be quite challenging, given the confidence to do that. I've discussed this with Ranj in the past, and we were kind of comparing notes. I think there's quite a limited range of academic texts on at very early stage ventures. There's a lot of textbooks and texts out there that talk about creating businesses. There's lots that then jump into kind of how to manage and grow a business, but there actually aren't many that focus on this quite messy first couple of years that many ventures face. And if anyone does have any good texts, I'd be very happy to have them. Assessing reports on very different ventures is challenging. By only having 6 ventures and me choosing them and knowing a lot about them, I think it helps control that to an extent. But within the rubric and within my approach to marketing, I do have to accept that some clients will share different levels of information. Some clients will also come from businesses that are much more technical than others. So there's kind of maybe more challenges with that as well. But I do think there's a real value here, but that is a real challenge. I think also a challenge is measuring the impact on students' entrepreneurial skills development, which is a key reason we do this. So I have some fairly basic measures that I've shown you and have looked a little bit more detail on this, but it's something I probably need to spend a little bit more time doing. And I definitely, as Ranjit said as well, need to work on measuring the impact this does have on the ventures. One of the only measures I actually have, which I do share with the students, is that we have actually had one venture close every year within 6 months of this unit. And I think that's actually a good thing to tell the students, because this is the reality of, small businesses being launched, that not all are going to be successful. And I explain previous ventures have taken part at the start. And we do talk about which ones have, made changes that I'm aware of, but also the fact that some, do decide actually this isn't for them, or the challenges they're facing are too much. And I do think, that does add a kind of really good real life part, but I definitely need to get a little bit better at doing that aspect. So some overall reflections I would have: I think it does have significant value for both students and ventures, but I need to do more to get evidence of this. It is challenging in terms of increasing module size, and it's questionable the extent to which this approach is truly scalable, which is something certainly in the Masood Center we do try and do with a lot of our courses. It can take up a lot of time, and at times stress, setting up and running this module. I've been fairly lucky with the ventures. I've only had a couple of times when they've not been able to do the Q&A because an opportunity has risen up, a funding opportunity or an important meeting, and we've been able to switch that. But I'm aware that, getting the ventures to work on this over a number of months is a challenge. It's using a lot of their time. And if I do increase the number of clients, that could be a challenge going forward. And I also think there are several areas where improvements can be made on this. And I am always looking to look in terms of doing that. I want to pause there because I have 10 minutes and I will answer any questions if we have them. But we are actually, I think, joined by Bessa. I can see her on the delegate list. Bessa Musama is one of the current ventures taking part in this course. So she's got a health and beauty business. She's been the first time she's taken part in this course. I just asked if she would join at this point in the talk just to give her perspective on it. I would also like to say I've asked her to be very honest about this, to talk about her experiences, the positives, but I've made it clear that these sessions are about sharing best practice, but also challenges and what could be done better. So hopefully Bessa can also kind of share if she'd be happy to be more engaged in some ways. Maybe that would be one aspect of that. So if you are there, Bessa, and able to unmute and join us.
Hello.
Hello, Bessa.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, my name is Bessa and I'm the founder of Kutemwa Skin. So Kutemwa Skin is an African heritage inspired skincare brand. Essentially what I do is I create skincare products that are inspired by African botanical ingredients from my own background. And I kind of identified this need from seeing like the heightened awareness of consumers in the UK, especially post-COVID, to understand what's in the products they use and what effects it has on them. And additionally, I also noticed kind of an increased demand for inclusivity in the beauty industry. So people really speaking up and saying, why don't you serve people with, this type of skin tone, or why don't you serve people in this category? So I really saw an opportunity there for myself to create a brand that was going to address that in using kind of natural, high efficacy ingredients and using the resources that I have here in the UK to create a finished product that serves, people with deeper skin tones like myself. So yeah, I've been doing that venture for about 3 years. I started coming from straight out of university at the University of Manchester, where I studied marketing, a master's in marketing, and I was supported by the Masood Enterprise team as well to start my business. So it was actually quite interesting being part of this project, because being supported by the Masood Enterprise team, I had to create a business plan and create my business model and do like SWOT analysis and things like that. So when I was taking part in this and I saw the work that the students had done, I was able to compare it to what I had previously done, and it was almost exact. So that was really encouraging to say they understood my business, they understood where I was coming from, and they understood my business model. Of course, they had some questions in terms of, oh, you're kind of importing ingredients from Africa. How is that working? Or who are your suppliers? How are you managing those relationships? Or kind of understanding, do you make the products yourself? How do you kind of go, through that stage from raw material to finished product? So it was good to discuss that with them through the Q&As. And then additionally, they wanted to understand my marketing, how I'm marketing myself, being in such a very saturated market, the beauty industry. There's so many products coming out with people who have, so much more funding. And as a small business, as a new entrant, how am I kind of uniquely bringing something, and how am I communicating that to get some attention, because it's a very noisy market. So we had those conversations in the initial Q&As, and I had 3 groups to speak to in the one day. So I think I did do 50 minutes and then have a break, and then 50 minutes and then have a break, and yeah, speak to the students. And I think they probably did find me as one of the more informal founders, because we were just chatting and having a laugh, and I kind of allowed them to take the lead and really get everything they needed from me. I do think doing 3 groups was fine for me, especially in one day. I think I was able to manage it well, and the time flew by. I almost thought would have too much time and would be there sitting awkwardly, but you'd be surprised, the time flew by so quickly, and Adam had to come in and stop us from chatting and almost say, last question, finish up quickly. So I think that was really good for me. Being my first time, I thought, oh, this is going to be a very long day, or what am I going to say? What are they going to say? Are they going to be shy? But I found that the students were very willing to get right into it. They came prepared. They had their notes. They knew the questions. And some of them kind of had maybe like a designated person who was asking the questions. And then if anything was left out, the others would pitch in. So it went really well. And just feedback on that, Adam, I think 3 groups is manageable for me as a venture. I think maybe based on my time, I had enough time to be able to manage the 3. And I think if it was over, say, 2 days, could have possibly even managed to do more groups, maybe even up to 5, because I know you're talking about the scalability of this. But yeah, it was a really good experience. And once I got the feedback in terms of the posters, I noticed, like I said, they had fully understood what my business was. They had done their further research on my website. And I just had to make very minor corrections to steer them in the right directions on, how they understood my business model. And then finally, then they prepared the full report, which I must say as well was very high quality. I was impressed by the fact that as a group of maybe like 6 students, they were able to put together such a, cohesive like reports and piece of work that just read really well, and was very easy to understand. I think from the initial posters that I got, they had put in like, this is a SWOT analysis, which I understood, but then they had different tools that they had used that I didn't understand. But then when the final report came, because they explained it, I was able to understand what their analysis is and what their feedback is and their recommendations. And yeah, it's been really beneficial, I think, for myself as a business owner, because I'm a solo founder, and at the moment it's just myself in the business. So it was helpful to have a group of students to have fresh ideas, or to question me, or to give me, some feedback, because often I have to make decisions by myself. Of course, I speak to my customers on the product side, but in terms of running the business, you almost find that you just make your own decisions and you learn as you go. But I think this project will help me in terms of just kind of being able to see things from different angles, because they did give me feedback on myself as a founder and say, we saw these strengths in you, but you might need support with this area, or, your business model is great, but there's a risk here and there's a risk there. So really identifying things that maybe I haven't thought about, or, you know, or maybe I've thought about, and the fact that they've brought it up, I'm like, okay, I need to do something about this. So it's been so beneficial for me, and I think it's a great impact on the venture, and I think on the students as well. It's not just kind of taking part in this and putting my time into it. I feel I'm really getting value from it. And just based on the feedback, like you said, Adam, I think it would be great for me to, once I've gone through the reports in detail, let you know what recommendations that I would put into place. And then sometime down the line, we could have a call where we speak about that, because I think it would be really encouraging for the next group of students to know that this was the change, this was the impact that was done, and the recommendations were actually used. I think it could be a great driving force for the next students. But I think it's such a really, like, it's a really good kind of live experience for the students. Just thinking back to my time as well, studying at the University of Manchester, the courses that stood out to me were the ones where we had something memorable, like a live interaction or a live talk where we actually got to interact with, not just, the theory of things, but, actual people who are part of certain organizations. So, yeah, I found it really, really good, and I'm happy to take part again and again.
That's good to hear, and especially you're willing to do more. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for the kind of comments, and hopefully that kind of gives. And I should say I really didn't brief Bessa much. I was like, just be honest and say what you thought about it. And I think that is actually quite a common piece of feedback I get from a lot of the ventures, is that especially if they're a solo founder, they don't necessarily get to talk in this much detail about their business or really think about it in different ways with different groups of people, and especially people who maybe aren't founders themselves. So I think a lot of do pick up on that. I'm aware of time, and I do want to give people a break. If you do have any questions, if you put them in the chat, I'll answer them in the chat. But there is a question and answer session right at the end as well, where you can ask any questions there. But thank you, Bessa, again for giving up your time again. I know you've also given a guest talk on my other lecture, so I have used your time a lot. But yeah, if you're able to stay for a little bit in the break, if anyone has any questions of Bessa, they can maybe ask this in the chat as well. But otherwise, we'll take a 10-minute break and come back around 11:20. Okay, thank you. Thanks. I worked closely with both Julie and Mark, and know that the work they're doing in this area is really kind of really good examples, and examples from large final year undergraduate units, and also being used in a master's dissertation project. So some different approaches to what myself and Manji have been doing as well. So I'm going to hand over to Julie and Mark. I'm not sure. I think Julie's starting. So if you want to share the screen.
Sorry, false start. I haven't actually unmuted myself. Great. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all see my slides. Sorry,
Julie, do you want to put it on presenter? There it is. That's okay.
Yeah, it is now. Yeah, so Adam, thank you for the introduction and the invite to talk this morning. So both Mark and I will be talking through kind of action research projects. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I come originally from industry and joined education 5 years ago. So I come from a management consultancy background. Very much my ethos of teaching is all around experiential learning, and very keen to really draw together theory with practice and creating learning environments that gives people both insights and where they can learn to be quite creative in their approach to business. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself before I carry on?
Yes, thanks, Julie. Good morning, everybody. My name's Mark Palmer. I'm Professor of Marketing and Strategic Management, as you can see there on the slides. I'm also the Programme Director for the MSc in Marketing Programme.
Great, thank you, Mark. And just to add, I suppose there's multiple roles and two that I'll talk about today. I am the Director of Business Engagement, and I'll talk a little bit around sourcing, as this very much ties to this role. And then in particular, I'm going to focus on undergraduate consultancy project module, in which I'm the module coordinator. So to give you a little bit of context, what we try to achieve is opportunities for students to engage with organisations of various sizes. And in particular, when I talk about new and small business ventures, I'm thinking about the network that we engage with to develop this, because this has been a work in progress. We engage both with the local entrepreneurship ecosystem, where there is a number of co-working spaces and innovation accelerators. And also in the wider university, we have a number of entrepreneurship teams and programs that are running, in which both our academics and students engage in to develop their businesses, as well as additional networks such as the Chief Executives Club and the Science Shop, which focuses on third sector research projects. So in order to gain, I suppose, demand, we look at these various networks, and we're linked in with them in order to drive opportunities. Now, how do we do this? It has been a team which has grown from a placement team into a much wider business engagement team. And we've created and developed and nurtured relationships across the whole ecosystem, and really tap into the wider business network, with Chamber of Commerce, Women in Business, different networks and societies, but as well looking more internationally as well. So really, we've tried to develop more the opportunity that our students can engage with international businesses, which are small businesses or startup businesses as well. And we've availed of our Lumini network as well where possible. To give you an idea of the market that we sit in, it is predominantly micro businesses. 89% of Northern Ireland has less than 10 employees. And also Northern Ireland is the fastest growing UK region for startups. So it seems to be a great area to start your business. So I suppose over the last 5 years, we've really looked to develop how we engage with businesses. And the key challenge is a lot of businesses don't understand how to access knowledge and expertise, or even what we can offer as a business school. So we have spent some time developing out our business hub, which includes a number of initiatives, and one being called the Business Club or the Business Clinic. And the Business Clinic is a front door for action research projects. So businesses kind of recognize the term more, where we talk about that they can utilize student consultancy teams to work on a specific issue. And this is the way that we go out and advertise it in the local market. And obviously we've built up a lot of personal relationships as well. So we make people aware of when there is opportunities. So this can be opportunities on the undergrad program. It also could be opportunities on the MBA program or HRM program as well. So this is something that we've really been working on and developing through. So you can see on the right-hand side the types of initiatives we will go out with. Social campaigns, sometimes they can be paid advertisements as well. And we've also spent some time doing video case studies, because just as what both Ranjit and Adam had talked about, thinking around the impact that we make on our local society is quite difficult to do. And so we've tried to capture some of the insights and value that the businesses have gained through the experience through these case studies. And it helps, I suppose, frame to students, kind of what is expected and what could be achieved. But as well, it gives businesses that reassurance too, that they will get a lot of valuable output at the end of the engagement. So focusing more on the module, where I'm the module coordinator. So in the final year of the business management and international business programs, students get the opportunity to undertake a module called consultancy projects. And that's where the student gets an opportunity to develop their consultancy skills. So really they're developing their analysis evaluation skills, and they work on a real project with an external organisation, which I have sourced with them. So to give you an idea of scale, currently this year there is 130 students and 22 projects ongoing at this moment in time. This module is taught over the course of the whole year. It is a 40 cap module, and there is 4 assessments, which follows the life cycle of a project. So some of these projects may be with larger corporate organizations, but a large majority of them are with SMEs, and a number are with startups as well, which I'll focus on in particular today. Ultimately, what they deliver, the businesses engage with the organization. I set up the initial meeting, but then it's over to them. And I go through a series of workshops to really help them develop their skills in order for them to develop their consultancy skills. But they will undertake both primary and secondary research to ultimately lead to the formation of a consultancy report. Now, this report, which I'll show you shortly, or a bit of a feel for it, it is a short report, 6,000 words, very focused on actually a pictorial representation, being very factual, being very succinct in language, more aligned with the likes of a consultancy house such as McKinsey, where I very much put a lot of emphasis around infographics and ensuring that there is limited I suppose there's a critical assessment of the literature and of the primary research, but that is provided to the client in a very succinct format. So the format of this, I delivered in workshop style. It's a series of 6 workshops and 6 one-to-ones with each team. So each team have 5 to 6 students. So there's quite a level of support. I've also front-loaded the workshops that the majority of them occur in the first semester. And this really is to ensure that the students have the skills and the knowledge in order then to deliver on a lot of the primary research that they tend to undertake at the beginning of the second semester. So I do spend a lot of time up front around helping students with their communication style. Do a lot of work around what's their working style, around team development, how do you produce high-performing teams, and then we go on to look around problem solving and look at different research techniques of how to understand the business problem, both from a more trying to find the root cause as well as being much more creative. What I've found, I asked them all to complete a survey around their kind of leadership or working style. And what I find is that the majority of students which are coming through the business school tend to be very people orientated and very detail orientated, which is fabulous, but very few of them are real kind of more visionary individuals. And where I feel there's a lot of lacking ability is actually around creativity. You know, so a lot of them like to know the facts and figures, but actually thinking creatively in business is extremely important. And I think this is what this module really offers, is for them to not only know the theory, but actually what is appropriate to that organization. I then go on, as I mentioned, go through different research approaches, talk about how you conduct questionnaires, interviews, etc. But then I spend time on data analytics. And actually getting them, you know, quite savvy with how they interrogate data effectively and how they present it. So I do a lot around data visualization and the formation of infographics. All of this, as I mentioned, is through workshop format. So it tends to be a session where I'll deliver more the theory based, but then I'll break it up with more an activity. So it's very much an engagement, a two-way engagement all the time. Now, this can be difficult with that amount of students. And, you know, a lot of feedback has been that they've been very used to having lectures, whilst I actually have a mic and I bring it around the classroom and I ask for their feedback on a regular basis. Now, initially, I think some of them find it quite terrifying, but then they get used to it. And I also have created rooms where they can actually engage in groups of 5 or 6 jointly. So it's not necessarily in a lecture room, but it's more in a project room. Then each group, so 3 times in the first semester and 3 in the second, they get to meet one-to-one with their academic supervisor. So I supervise half the projects from this year. And this is an opportunity for them to really, develop their understanding of, one, the business, but also to ask any questions or for me to address any challenges they may have. The expectation is on them that they actually lead the communication with the organization, and I ask them to have one point of contact and have agreed on a communications approach with the client, be that through email or be that maybe through a monthly update. The deliverables are 4 assessments. As I said, following the life cycle of the project, they produce a proposal presentation, which they deliver face-to-face. Then there's a research plan, the actual business report, which is the more visual representation. And then they reflect on the whole experience, both on working in the team, but also on the recommendations that they've provided to the organization. How could they do things better? These are some examples of some of the startups and new ventures that we've helped and support. They vary considerably in the topic, social media strategy. It's a startup, Get Sociable, that wasn't launched. And so we were really helping them establish what their strategy should be to target their key kind of stakeholders. Another one called Network Fit. It was a fitness platform, really interested to develop out. They really wanted to understand who their customers were, where they should target, and really work about a strategic review of what they had planned and whether it was appropriate for their business. Third business, further along, Team Fee Pay. We've actually done a number of projects for them. So to give you an idea, I suppose, they Get Sociable, have 1 founder, plus they had about 3 part-time staff. Network Fit had 2 co-founders. They're at that stage. Both of those parties had gained funding through various, either through different schemes. These tended to come through, actually, one came through Catalyst, the other had got a number of innovation vouchers, etc., from an Invest in I. Team Fee Pay were further along, larger organization. I think they were up to maybe about 6 or 7 employees at this stage when we started to engage with them. We had projects for 2 years with them, and actually one of our students was employed following the first project. So it's always nice to see, and I see that coming through now as a recurring trend. So it seems to be a good opportunity for businesses, especially at the startup stage, to see real talent coming through. And then when they have the money, then they tend to go back to those students and potentially offer them a solution. As I mentioned, we do try to undertake a number of case studies. And this is just one example of a company called People Playbook. So I'll just play this so you get an idea of what we do.
People Playbook is a learning and development company. We specialise in development for leadership primarily and also teams. We became involved with the business clinic at Queen's through our offices in the Innovation Factory. The innovation manager, Shane, sent an email around inviting us. Tony and I both looked at it and was like, this looks great. They're offering potential for students to do research for us on a subject chosen by us, so we jumped at it. The fact that it was free is definitely part of it. We're a startup, we're a growing business, and finance is always a factor. Something we always talk about, it'd be great if we knew a bit more about this subject. We just didn't have the resources to do it in-house. The calibre of students at Queen's is incredibly high. We knew that from a reputation point of view going into the project, and it's only been further confirmed through kind of our meetings and the work that we've done with the students, and their attention to detail, their professionalism has been great. I've been impressed with how personable they've been as well.
The project we selected was to analyse the leadership skills required to create a high-performing team in the workplace. we had to do our secondary research for that, first of all, which was to see what the literature had to say on skill gaps and leadership types within the workplace. So once we had a fair understanding of that, we then conducted our own primary research. So that involved constructing a survey, and then from that we could sort of combine the literature, what our primary research saying, what people thought would be the most prominent soft skill gaps in the workplace.
We set the students the task, the challenge of finding our blind spots. You know, what have we missed? What do we not know? Or what could make our leadership programs better? We've got a number of new insights that we can apply to our programs and workshops, and ultimately increase the impact that we have when delivering these programs and serving our clients. We would really encourage other businesses to consider using the business clinic at Queen's. We find it to be a great experience, and we really look forward to working with the business clinic at Queen's again in the future.
So I suppose the development of case studies such as this is, really helped us, I suppose, one, to kind of prove the impact that can make locally, but also it's been fantastic for advertising then, the following year. To give you an idea, last year, when we put out a request through the business clinic for undergraduates, I was inundated with projects. I probably got about 60 companies coming to me. And that's much higher than the previous year. And I think a lot of it is down to, them physically seeing maybe videos like this and, the word that actually it's very beneficial to the business and they get high quality output. I wanted also just to touch upon some of the challenges that I've experienced, and also show the benefits for the students, but I'll talk about challenges first. Startups generally are very cautious about who they share their information with. So the majority of them all want an NDA in place, and this is okay, but the NDA is with the individual and not with the university. And so you have to make it very clear to the students what they're agreeing to when they agree to undertake this project. The second challenge is around screening of companies. So a lot of these companies, if they're at startup stage, some of them, the majority of them have, actually set up their business. Some have not. And we have to be very careful around the safety for our students and ascertain, could there be any difficulties in the future based off, and of course, this is just based off the information that you can provide. So we normally do, checks obviously in company house and look at the individual, but there can always be scenarios that you're not really prepared for. I can give you, a few examples. One where maybe the company were being a little bit too social with the student group, nearly acting more like a student in many respects, where the students felt slightly uncomfortable. And another issue, because these companies tend to only have, their founding, so they might have 2-3 employees. I had one that was suffering quite considerably from mental health concerns, but I was unaware of that and only formulated later on. And I had a lot of challenges when there was a lot of illness within their family and remit. So you have to be very careful around how you manage and how you screen those relationships of who the students engage with. Others is tends to be that startups are extremely excited and passionate, of course, about their business idea, but also, as we know, many of those businesses pivot. And sometimes this means that the scope may change. So these projects are over the course of a year. So I really emphasize around agreeing the scope up front. And yes, there will be minor changes, but that there shouldn't be considerable changes by the client. But it tends to be more for startups or small scale ventures that they are so passionate and I think the students can do more and more. So we really need to put limitations around the amount of work. And the other challenge is, there's limited resources in any startup and you're very reliant on those business contacts. So if, for instance, they get a big funding bid in or, they've got a potential client, their focus very much is going to go on that. And sometimes that doesn't align to what the student is delivering. So, I'm very much I always make it very clear, and I tended to stick to projects that maybe don't involve as much direct interaction regularly with the business. So for example, for startups, in a lot of instances, you don't need to look internally at the business in terms of maybe like operational setup. It is more looking at an external view around maybe a new strategic direction or maybe entering a new market. So it means that they're less reliant then on information from that business contact. Benefits from this student, there is a lot of professional skill development in this, a lot around communicating both within a team, but also then with a client. There's a lot of exposure, particularly in startups, to every aspect of the business. So it tends to be, if a project is with a corporate, it may be down a particular function, but with a startup, the students get to experience much broader perspective on a business. And also, as I mentioned, it has led to employability opportunities for some of the students. So I'm just going to pass over to Mark then to talk further about postgraduate.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. So I'm going to just cover my experiences with the internship projects at the postgraduate level. And as I previously noted there, I'm the program director of the MSc, which is slightly different to both Julie and Adam's perspective, insofar as I wouldn't have the same degree of control over the academics that assess or coach or develop or mark or deliver this particular aspect. But really, just by way of introduction and setting the scene in terms of the internship, the students are given a choice. Now, what's quite interesting about that is initially when they start the course, there's big demand for consultancy engagement. But over the course of the first 2 semesters, that tends to fall off somewhat. So I think that's quite an interesting observation insofar as when you give students a choice, and maybe it relates to the kind of, I suppose, where the word gets out, where they have to do their work in terms of their work experience and also write their dissertation at the same time. But obviously we've tried to develop and refine it over the years, and as I have been course director, I think on 3 different occasions now, we've brought in different changes. So one has certainly been the word reduction, and it's really interesting hearing from Adam in terms of what his analysis and recommendations, and also some of the questions that were posed around the line, and certainly with Ranjit in terms of what is a recommendation and what is the duty of care that we have as academics in relation to, you know, what responsibility do the students have in terms of actually recommending. So you can see there we've reduced the word count significantly from 17,000 words to 10,000. Just a few other little I suppose points on this. Initially it was the students were expected to write an action-based research project, and that was 100%, but I changed that to an 80-20% split. So the action project itself, the written piece, is 80% now, and there's a 20% weighting for presentation. Now, just to note on that, that the presentation itself is not on the content specifically, but on the actual process of their experiences going through this. The other observation there is that there was a third option, which was an academic review, and at a group level, and we decided to discontinue that. So the students effectively have two choices there. The other thing to note is, I suppose I noted there about the higher demand. There is a trade-off between the students in terms of their expectations and wants. So some of them want to work for big companies and want to go into big companies, and there is I suppose part of the induction process and part of setting their expectations as program director in terms of encouraging them to work with early ventures, small firms, and the merits of that. So I have worked quite a bit on that. The other thing as well, I suppose that maybe others have hinted at certainly, is in respect to having opening conversations with the firms and the ventures and the startups and the owners. They tend to be in search of insights. Some of their activities that they have internalized, and this is well documented, as everybody probably listening here would know in the literature. But what I have found is that, sometimes they're looking for, I suppose, a sense of feeling comfortable interacting with a large university. They're maybe not used to interacting with academics, and so it's good to humanize that and to relax and set them at ease. And what I tend to do is just go for a coffee and explain what we do. And I know some of the other slides that I'm going to cover here would touch on that, but what I would emphasize is that I certainly wouldn't emphasize problems, because what happens typically is the individuals start to ladder into problems, whereas I would frame most of the activities in around issues that they may or may not have, or and it varies. Some of those issues are straw in the wind, so they don't really know. They're kind of at the periphery of certain issues, and they are not really sure. They haven't really explored it, so they're looking for a scoping exercise. And then others are much more precise, so really pointy in terms of the issue, and some of them have come forward with setting, I suppose I use the terms of reference, but more of a kind of one pager on what they're doing, what the background of their venture, and what they're wanting the student to follow. Unlike Julie and Adam there, in terms of their presentation, these are individualized projects, so not group-based. So, again, that has implications. And thankfully at QBS, we have a very strong careers and placement office. And really, if I were to probably sum up, in terms of the resource capacity, that really underpins all of the what I would call the hard work, whereas the academics maybe don't have that level of engagement. It's work like, for example, what Julie has mentioned there, and she's part of that team in terms of developing out the contacts and the networks, etc. I think that's really important to have that capacity and scaffolding in place. Now, Julie, I'm a bit of a rookie here in terms of presenting, co-presenting. So if you wouldn't mind moving along. So really, that sets the scene again, that slide, really just summarizing the 8 modules that are prerequisites to the internship itself. So you can see there are 4 in each semester, and then that leads in to the student choice, whether they want to pursue the traditional dissertation or whether they want to pursue the management consultancy. I should say this probably dates back, going on now for, let's say, about 12 years, 13 years. Initially, there was a big debate, and most universities, traditional universities, will have that debate internally around whether we should be kind of engaging in such projects. Some take a more traditional hardline approach. Then there's a kind of, I suppose, a spectrum there of opening up, and we engaged in that conversation as well. And certainly at the time when I was there was a big discussion around that. But you'll probably see the legacy of that discussion, and the legacy of that discussion typically comes through in the actual design, and that comes through in the very basis of the projects being very research based and action based in their approach. So you can see there from the slide that underpins very much, and it's inescapably anchored in research. And I think that's very much the Queen's, I suppose, philosophy, but will very much depend, because some universities will be further down the journey, as it were, maybe less so. So it'll vary. But what we've found is it's very much weighted in that kind of idea of research underpinning it, and you'll see the term kind of, I suppose, action research. Now, we did reduce down the 10,000 because the students quickly copped on, and the penny, it's interesting, the penny always drops very quickly with students, as most of us know, when it comes to workloads. And they quickly ascertain whether or not, if you're looking at the choices, well, you know, I have to do extra work, plus I have to do this project, and I still have 17,000 words to write. So we thought that was perhaps a little bit unfair. And it's interesting what Adam and what he was presenting there in terms of analysis and recommendations and that structure there, and even like different ways to format that. I think we would be certainly open to refining our approach further. We just, as Adam pointed out, there's no script out there on this, and we kind of have been, you know, listening to feedback, but also listening to colleagues as well in terms of what their views would be on this. If we could just move it along then, Julie, please. Clearly there are learning outcomes with this. It's a 60 credit dissertation, so that accounts for 1/3 of the program, so it's a significant proportion of the program, and probably I would say, unlike Adam as approach, which I think is much better, I should say, we wouldn't have the same level of coaching that will go into the consultancy project. I think Adam's covering quite an extensive. Now, to qualify that, and certainly in my partial defence in terms of our own institution, we would cover many of these aspects in the previous 8 modules. So it's not necessarily linked directly into the module itself. But as you can see there, formulating questions, thinking about the company and whether they have databases. Obviously, if they're early stages, they will not have that. It'll be very messy. And in fact, one of the feedbacks that we would get, and some of the problematic students that maybe, let's just say, are quite anxious about this project, would be, you know, the feedback around, you know, this is messy, it's informal, they don't have any structure, these organizations are not organizations at all. And of course, that's natural, and it's to be welcome. And we put a big emphasis on how to get comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And of course, that's very difficult for some students that perhaps have come from maybe a more science background. We would attract students on the course that maybe are from biosciences, and they tend to be quite analytical. Everything's, you know, typically in black and white. And when they go into these early ventures, you know, there's a lot of, I suppose, confusion and you know, for them itself. And it's that kind of understanding that we would look certainly around question development, but also in terms of conclusions and what to conclude. And I know that's been a discussion so far this morning, and I would probably second Ranjit's kind of argument there. And I know the word consideration has been used extensively this morning in and around recommendations, and we would be certainly clear that these are students. And we have a duty of care for those students. I have at individual companies approaching our course. I've had coffees with individuals who have outright directly asked me, who are the top 3 students on your course? I would like to have a conversation with those individuals. And we're very clear on that. We have a duty of care. And it's not just simply for individual companies to come in to use it as a PR exercise or to target students or to single out the high performance students. We seek that, and I suppose preserve that kind of idea of duty of care, and in terms of looking to develop that and, you know, explore more of what they're looking for. I think Rajit said this morning there, it's nothing beyond a suggestion, and we would put that forward certainly, and I stress that quite a bit in relation to considerations. And I know some others this morning were asking about the value of recommendations, but I suppose that's a point that, you know, we could certainly discuss perhaps in the afternoon. Just in terms of skills, you can see there that would be what we would advocate. We link it in with the assurance of learning, which has been, I suppose, become much more strongly advocated within the school, and dovetailing in around the key skills in relation to accreditation. Again, we're at a different probably stage relative to some of the other institutions, but you can see there with regards to the communications and the presentations that are required, and also communicating with owners, etc., and even the critical thinking involved. But again, you'll see the legacy of the research emanating through that. Just the next slide, please. Yes, just a few quick points in relation to this. If I could just maybe probably start at the end here and work back in a classic entrepreneurial way. Backstop, again, we give the students choice, and there's always the backstop of the traditional dissertation. And as I observed, what you typically find is that there's a bit of gusto at the outset in relation to wanting to select the internship, but over time that perhaps the course chisels their experience and shapes them in relation to that. And so what we find is there's not the same level of demand. And I know Adam was talking about numbers there around 150, and I know, Adam, that's a big number, and I certainly would be not necessarily looking or facing down at that level of number, but having that backstop in place is a good way to mitigate against that. All of the work placements, internships, kind of projects are all screened. So I think that's really important. The expectations set at the outset during the induction period, again, really just to showcase that this is a competitive selection process. The students, again, have the choice, and that choice is to find their own placement, but again, that would be screened by the office here, the placement office, and their capabilities, careers and placement, I should say, because I was corrected on that. Selection criteria, again, we don't necessarily have a narrow view on that. I think Julie succinctly outlined that there's a broad spectrum, but the composition here in Northern Ireland is typically small firms, SMEs, so it's of no surprise then to see that. And then in terms of availability, and again, that's a point that's been made this morning there throughout, in terms of ensuring that the students have a very, I suppose, beneficial and experiential cycle of learning back and forward between their academic supervisor and their individuals. Thank you, Julie. That's right on cue. Just to stress, and I guess I've taken this from the material from the course. So again, this is not necessarily scripted by myself. This has been scripted, but the key point here is probably the latter point here. Is that cycling between the investigation, the data collection, and the analysis of the marketing issue. Again, having that. And just to add some colour, Julie, if you may, in terms of examples, these are the sorts of examples that what we would describe as issues that the students may explore. So sales data, I'm particularly interested in no sale days, and the anxiety around no sale days or no sale months even, with regards to that. Some aspects around service quality, customer satisfaction, complaints data, scoping out export opportunities. We have particularly small market here, so that's something that the students always find interesting. Digital channels, designs in terms of how to engage with stakeholders and different customer voices. Promotional methods and developing interactional contents. Certainly with blogs, that's a really big kind of area. It's how do you generate content, and how do you do that over a long period of time and sustain that? These are all typical issues you'll find. Segmentation, targeting, and road mapping around new technologies that are emerging. I find that's always an area that new ventures just simply don't have the time, or as previously pointed out, there's a blind spot, and they don't really know, because of the amount of new technologies moving forward, moving through and across their desk, and there's sometimes they need a little bit of time to scope that out and what that means for their own as both business model or value proposition, etc. Some internal approaches to how to organize themselves, web content, best channels, and analytics, of course, whether that's KPIs. But we would always go back to questions, because sometimes the students can become somewhat blinded by metrics, but bringing it back to questions and around the remit of it. Julie, if you may. Yeah, so these are just a couple. They're not as colourful, and I would certainly blame not myself for this. I just got a delivery here, and I'm looking out the window. My builder's delivering a few bags of sand. There's sod's law, so I better wrap this up fairly quickly because he's asking for instructions for that. But just a couple of little examples, a few little points to note on at the end. So how do you actually support this? That's the big question, especially if you are a research active academic. You're also asked to do business engagement, you're asked to deliver teaching, you're asked to develop impact case studies, you're asked to, let's say, do a few cartwheels in the yard, and all the rest of it. How do you actually do this in terms of making it pragmatic? And I think Adam, the pragmatism around 150 students as well. Okay, how do you scaffold the learning in terms of Canvas? Is it doable to engage in one-to-one with academic members of staff? That is a big question, and students are always pushing the boundaries, as we know. So are entrepreneurs, as we know as well. So we don't offer proofreading services, but that doesn't stop them from asking. They always ask. I suppose to sum up, I think it's a wonderful kind of design. I haven't really touched upon the marking rubric, but just to say that the school have, I suppose, two broad perspectives or continuum there. Firstly, they went down the route of very precise marking rubrics, and then the pendulum has swung over to a more general one where you would just provide general overall feedback. But ultimately, in both, it's a strengths first approach. So you're really emphasizing the strengths of the students and what they did in that experience and interactional experience, and focusing on areas for improvement. And I think I shall wrap it up there because my delivery man is at the window. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Julie, as well. I think that was a really kind of great two presentations that cover quite a lot. I think I would certainly say if anyone here is in a role within their university where they're engaged, they're having to kind of improve or look at business engagement, then I'm sure Julie would be happy for them to reach out for you. Julie, when I worked for her, has been doing a huge amount of Queens around this subject. So I think it's great to have that kind of broader perspective, but then also good to have the kind of large undergraduate unit that takes place every year. And then Mark with the dissertations. And I previously was also a program director for marketing, so used to manage this process as well. And I've supervised students who've done the internship and seen the huge value in kind of them seeing their actions and what they're doing and kind of reflecting on that. We've obviously been talking for a lot, and kind of hopefully you've taken some from that. We do want to get your input into this as well. So Rob soon is going to put you into a breakout room. I know most students dread this part, but we really would value having some input from you. What I would like to do is just really 3 questions to discuss in your breakout room to share what you're doing. So what are your experiences of working with new and small ventures in entrepreneurship education? What benefits have you seen and potentially measured, and challenges encountered? We'll discuss this till around 12:30 in the breakout rooms. If you could individually input what you're doing, benefits seen and challenges as you're discussing this onto Menti. So before you go in the breakout room, if you can make a note of the code or take a picture of the QR code, if you're happy to put your name and university along with what you're doing, that would also be a good way for other people here to perhaps reach out to some of you. And when we have the kind of final Q&A session at past, also, if anyone's got any really great examples they want to give kind of a 30-second overview on, we could do that as well. So I'll give you a few seconds to make a note of the code, take the QR code, and then Rob will put you into breakout rooms. And just have a general discussion about the 3 topics and individually input answers into that.
Okay, so I think everyone should have got the code now. So we're just manually asking people to 6 breakout rooms, and as Adam said, we'll get you back in. Okay, so you should see an invite now to join one of these breakout rooms.